Chapter 15. While she had been excited the previous day to see her parents, she dreaded lunch with Elizabeth's mother. Still, if Dr. Rose was right, she needed to do this. She dressed in the skirt and blouse that Gabe had bought for her. She smiled at her reflection. She really did love the outfit. She was to meet Dr. Rose in front of the building at 15 minutes before 12. She was standing just inside the lobby door when he drove up. He leaned across the front seat and opened the door for her. "Are you ready?" "I suppose, as ready as I'll ever be." "Well, lass, you look lovely. Hop in." When she was settled and buckled in, he said, "You have nothing to worry about, Elsie. Just be yourself, and everything will be fine." Elsie nodded, but had trouble tamping down the butterflies in her stomach. "I understand you met Aldous and Joe Sinclair over the weekend, and everyone had a bit of a surprise." At the thought of her parents, Elsie smiled. "Yes, I never ever imagined that they were time-travelers." "I have to admit, I thought it amazing when Joe found Aldous, but that you have turned out to be their lost daughter is mind-boggling. Just when I think I have Gertrude's plan sorted out, something else pops up." "That's the truth." "You know, Elsie, in many ways, Elizabeth's parents are a bit like Aldous and Joe. They made choices in their lives that led them away from their daughter. Now they realize just what they have lost, and are trying, at least Elizabeth's mother is trying, to find her and connect with her again." Elsie nodded. "I guess I can understand that." "So, you'll give it a chance? You'll try?" "Yes, Dr. Rose, I'll try." Charlotte Quinn was already seated when they arrived at the posh French restaurant in Soho. She stood and opened her arms, a nervous, hopeful look on her face. "Elizabeth, darling, how are you feeling?" Elsie hugged her. "Better, thank you. My ribs still hurt some, but not nearly as much as they did." Charlotte turned a warm smile on Dr. Rose. "Dr. Rose, it's lovely to see you again. Thank you for arranging this." "It was my pleasure, Mrs. Quinn." "Please call me Charlotte." "Charlotte, then. Shall we sit down?" He held Charlotte's chair and then Elsie's before seating himself. "Elizabeth, well, darling, I'm sorry for the misunderstanding last week." Of all the things Elsie thought the woman might say, an apology was the last. "We were so worried about you. Truly, we were. And your father, you know how he can be, but no, I guess you don't. When something is very important and things aren't going well, when he's worried or scared, he shifts into command mode. He trusts his ability to handle anything more than he trusts anyone else. Darling, I have never seen him as upset as he was when the officers came to the house to tell us you had been in an accident. He wanted to leave immediately, but we were in the middle of a terrible snowstorm. He had our driver and helicopter pilot on standby. He wanted everyone ready to leave the minute the heliport was open. I am so sorry it took something as dreadful as this to, bring us together. I don't want a misunderstanding to tear us apart. We love you, Elizabeth." As Elizabeth's mother rambled on nervously, Elsie realized everything Dr. Rose had said was true. Charlotte was fully aware of the distance that had developed between them, and she wanted to repair the relationship. Elsie smiled. "I know you do." Dr. Rose cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should order before we dive too deeply into this." Elsie looked blankly at the menu and frowned. She had learnt all of the letters and was beginning to be able to read small words, but this menu had no pictures. Charlotte said softly, "You've always liked the Eggs Benedict. You're also fond of lamb, and there is a lamb sandwich on the menu. Also, today's special is le pain à la moutarde." At Elsie's frown, she added, "Rabbit in a Dijon mustard sauce." She wasn't sure what Eggs Benedict was, and she did like lamb, but she loved rabbit. "I think I'd like the rabbit." While they ate over the next hour, Charlotte kept the conversation going with inconsequential things, but eventually she brought the topic back around to Elizabeth. "Darling, it seems even though you haven't recovered your memories yet, you are becoming a bit more comfortable than you were in the hospital. Wouldn't you rather stay with me at our suite at the Fitzwilliam than be a burden to Dr. Saldani?" Elsie stiffened. Was she a burden to Gabe? She remembered his words from the previous evening. "I would do anything for her. I love her." She shook her head. "I am not a burden to Gabe. While I appreciate the offer, I would prefer to stay with him. I know you better. I can help you remember things. My memory will come back when it does. I like being with Gabe. I love him. But, no, Gabe helps me too. He's teaching me to read and do math. He isn't family. I don't want to argue about this. I would love to see you again and spend time with you, but I am going to continue living with Gabe for now." Elsie's tone was gentle but firm. Dr. Rose stepped in. "Charlotte, you have clearly raised your daughter to be a strong, capable woman. But she isn't able to be independent now. Not completely, no. But forcing your will on her is only going to make her more dependent, not less." Charlotte took one of Elsie's hands in hers. "I don't want to lose you." Elsie squeezed her hand. "You won't." Charlotte smiled and nodded. "Okay. Are you free on Wednesday?" "I meet with Dr. Rose on Wednesday afternoons. I could pick you up and take you to lunch before your appointment." Elsie smiled. "I'd like that. Afterward we can go shopping. I'm not sure where you got that outfit, but boho chic is passé and not your style." Elsie shook her head and laughed. "If this outfit is boho chic, then it is my style. I don't care if it's passé, whatever that is, because I love it." Charlotte pursed her lips as if poised to criticize, but stopped herself. She gave Elsie an indulgent smile. "You're right. If you like it, it's your style." When Elsie was in the car again with Dr. Rose, he asked, "How do you feel that went?" "Okay, I guess. I see what you meant now about Elizabeth's parents being afraid." "I thought you handled things beautifully. You were kind and accessible, but you stood firm where you needed to. I suspect Elizabeth would have had a bit more trouble with that." "It's a little surprising. I come from a time and place where I have few, if any, choices." "Indeed. In fact, most of the people I know who travel back in time, especially the women, struggled quite a bit with that. When they return, they usually have a newfound appreciation for their personal freedoms." "I'm not surprised. Once I learned I could make my own choices, I really didn't want to give that authority to anyone else." Elsie sighed. "It will be hard to lose that when I return." As soon as she said it, she knew it wouldn't be the hardest thing to lose. She would lose her parents again, and Gabe. Her mind was filled with images of the man Elizabeth loved. "I could love him too." "Nay, Elsie, don't go there. You'll have Geordie when you return. Don't make leaving even harder by giving your heart to Gabe." "Are you all right, Elsie? You became very quiet all of a sudden." "I'm fine. I was just thinking about my parents and Gabe." "Ah, yes. We should talk about that more on Wednesday. This won't be easy." "No, it won't be." "Maybe I can help you prepare?" "That's a good idea." Dr. Rose pulled up in front of Gabe's building. "Thank you for going with me, Dr. Rose. It helped a lot having you there." "You're comfortable enough to spend time with her on your own now. That was the goal." "And thanks for pushing me in the first place. I think I understand a little more now." "Good. I'll see you on Wednesday, then." She nodded and got out of the car. "I'll see you on Wednesday." When Gabe came home that evening, Elsie told him every detail of lunch with Elizabeth's mother that she could remember. He seemed genuinely pleased to hear things had gone well and that they had plans for Wednesday. "I was wondering the best way to get you to Dr. Rose's office. It's good that you and your mother are spending some time together." "That's important to you?" "Of course it is. I know you don't remember this, but I've always thought family was important. In medical school, it was hard for me to understand why you were so distant from yours. It's a little clearer now, but I still think it's a great opportunity for you to bond." "Bond?" He chuckled. "Spend some time getting closer." "I see. And do you bond with your family a lot?" He laughed outright. "Sweetheart, if my family were any closer, we'd be attached at the hips." "But you haven't spent any time with them since my accident." "No, my parents' home is in New Jersey, about an hour away by train. I usually go down there at some point during my days off." Guilt rose in Elsie, and she looked away. "And I kept you from that?" Gabe put a finger under her chin, drawing her gaze back to him. "I don't always go. Taking care of you was important, and I usually talk to at least one member of my family every day. On my walk to work in the morning, I usually talk to Joey, Dad, or Mom. They're all very early risers. When I walk home in the evening, it's usually one of my other brothers. Angie is all tied up in high school stuff during the week, but I nearly always talk to her on Saturdays. Nick is an architect with a big firm not far from NYUHC. Once in a while, he meets me at the hospital for lunch. I saw him yesterday." "You did? You didn't mention it." "I guess I didn't. The Sinclairs were here when I got home, and it slipped my mind. But we're going to go out to dinner with him on Saturday evening." "That's why we couldn't have dinner with the Sinclairs?" "Exactly. I was also planning to go down next week for a couple days, if that's okay." I suppose so. I'm a little afraid to stay by myself, but I'm sure I can manage." Gabe took her hand. "I didn't intend to leave you here, sweetheart. I was hoping you'd go with me." Elsie brightened. "And meet your family? I'd love to." "Good. We'll go down Thursday morning and come back on Friday." "That's over a week away." He grinned and canted his head sideways. "Is that a problem?" "Just that Gertrude might come and send me home before then." "No, we could go on Monday." "We could, except Thursday is my birthday, and my mom would be very upset if I didn't come home for it." "Go with him to his home?" She wanted to meet his family. At that moment she vowed that even if Gertrude came before next Thursday, Elsie would not say the word until after she had met Gabe's family. The next day, when Elsie visited the Sinclairs' home, she was stunned. She had been aware that they were very well off, and she remembered that Gabe had described himself as coming from a working-class family, which she'd assumed meant they had more modest means. She'd thought Gabe's apartment was quite nice, but she assumed the Sinclairs might be larger. She was not prepared for the reality. Dixon called for her, as her parents said he would. The driver stopped in front of a large building like Gabe's, but fancier. Dixon escorted her past the doorman and through the main lobby to a set of glass doors. A guard in this private lobby let them in. "Good morning, Dr. Quinn. I've notified the Sinclairs that you've arrived. You can go right up." "By myself? Where do I go?" The other guard frowned, obviously confused. Dixon's stern demeanor slipped for a moment, and she caught a brief glimpse of a smile. "You'll be fine. The elevator only goes to one floor and opens directly into the Sinclairs' home." Sure enough, when the elevator doors opened, her mother and father were waiting to greet her. The Sinclairs' apartment, which she learned was called a penthouse, was huge. Gabe's entire apartment would have fit in the living room, with plenty of room to spare. For that matter, she thought perhaps the entirety of Castle McCrae could fit inside their home. There were more rooms than Elsie could count, including one room that contained a beautiful pool of water that was for swimming. "The water is warm. We'll swim later if you'd like to," said her mother. "We can wrap your cast. Jennifer and Caroline leave clothes here. I'm sure there's a bathing suit that will fit you." "I think I'd like that." The water did look inviting. "I'd like to show you something, Elsie." Her mother took her hand and led her back to the entryway, where the elevator was. Aldous followed, closing two large, carved wooden doors. They had been open when she arrived, and Elsie hadn't paid them much heed. Aldous ran his hand lovingly over the carved surface. "I had these doors commissioned years ago. In fact, every home we own has front doors like these. No two are exactly the same, but they all have several things in common." Now that they were closed, Elsie realized that the two halves came together to make a beautiful tree with roots that spread out as broadly at the bottom of the tree as the branches did above. "This is called a tree of life," said her mother. "Your father had certain important symbols carved into the tree. Some are obvious." He pointed to the base of the tree, where the roots began to branch out. "Here is the Trinity knot, a Celtic symbol of the Holy Trinity. Our family is rooted there. And here, in the middle of the trunk, is a knot. If you look carefully, you can see 60 tick marks around the edge." "The pocket watch?" He smiled and nodded. "Exactly. The pocket watch. Half of it is on the left door, and the other half on the right." He pointed to one of the upper branches on the right door. "Carved into the grain of wood here is the motto of Clan Sinclair: 'Commit thy work to God.' But if you look carefully in the roots of the tree on the left door, you can see a Latin word, fortitudine, which means 'with fortitude,' the motto of Clan McCrae." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You see, sweetling, the left door represents our roots, our beginnings. The right door represents our present and future." She pointed to 4 birds in flight at the top of the right door. "These birds symbolize our children, Caroline, Jennifer, Xavier, and David. But there is one more little bird that often goes unnoticed. See there perched on the nest, in the branches on the left. That bird was our way of remembering you, the little one we left behind." "We've remembered you and prayed for you every day of our lives," said her father. Elsie was speechless. She reached out and touched the carving of the bird on the nest. The wood was smooth, as if it had been touched often. The rest of the family understood the Celtic knot, the motto of Clan Sinclair, and the 4 birds in flight were fairly obvious, said Joe. "Only a few people ever questioned fortitudine. It isn't very obvious, and it seems like a good place to be rooted, so it was easily explained," said her father. "And no one knows about the pocket watch, except for Gerald Rose, but he didn't even notice it at first." Her mother smiled. "However, the little bird on the nest has been the source of speculation for years. Some people think it represents me with an empty nest." Her father laughed. "That rather leaves me out of the picture, but it's understandable." "When the children were still young, they thought we hoped for another child. Other friends and family members have believed this over the years, too, or they believed that I had miscarried a child at some point." Aldous nodded. "We simply allowed people to speculate. Only Gerald, your mother, and I knew how very real the little bird in the nest was, and how very much we missed her." Tears filled Elsie's eyes as her fingers caressed the symbol of her parents' love for her. Dear God, she didn't want to leave. There was nothing for her in the past. Her parents were here. The man she loved was here. "Nay, Elsie, the man Elizabeth loves is here. Someone does wait for you." Chapter 16. Gabe always loved his first day off after working 7 in a row. He usually slept in and did nothing except catch up on laundry. But today he awoke with the woman he loved in his arms, and the sure knowledge that the day would not be spent doing nothing. Although he had joked with her about her social calendar at the beginning of the week, it turned out that her days had been filled while he worked. Her mother had taken the whole day off to spend with her on Wednesday. He didn't think anything about it until that evening when he'd asked her about the day. "It was very good. We had a lovely lunch and then went shopping." "Sounds like a typical mother-daughter day." "Does it? My mother said we'd never done that." "Really? That's hard to believe." "It's what she said. I'm not sure why it surprises you. You said you didn't think we were close." "I know I did, but lunch and shopping, or pedicures, with Mom is my sister's favorite thing to do, hands down." "Pedicures? What's a pedicure?" He smiled. Frankly, he wondered if Elizabeth had ever taken time for a pedicure. "A pedicure is a foot treatment. You soak your feet in warm water for a while, and then someone rubs the dry skin off, trims the nails, massages your feet and lower legs, and finishes by putting polish on your toenails." Elizabeth had looked incredulous. Really? And women like this? In my experience, they do. Maybe I should get my mother to go with me for a pedicure. It would probably do you both good. Elizabeth had spent Thursday and Friday with Mrs. Sinclair, who had taken her to see a variety of attractions in the city. Elizabeth's favorite had been the Central Park Zoo. There were so many animals I'd never seen before. You probably have seen them, you just don't remember. Right, that's what I meant. But I loved it. Mrs. Sinclair says that the Bronx Zoo is even bigger. She's going to take me there the next week you work nights. If you thought the Central Park Zoo had a lot of animals, wait until you see the Bronx Zoo. It's the largest zoo in the United States. Her eyes lit with a youthful exuberance that was both charming and insanely attractive. It made him want to be the one to take her there. Still, there were plenty of new experiences to share with her. Not if she gets her memory back. He tamped that little voice down. If all of her memories returned today, it would be a blessing. But even as he had that thought, a small part of him was falling in love with this version of Elizabeth. He had to admit, if only to himself, that he wasn't anxious for things to change. Today, however, he had her to himself for most of the day, and he'd planned a few things that he was sure would please her. He rose up on one elbow, brushed the hair from her face, and gave her a gentle kiss. She blinked her eyes, looking confused for a moment, before her face split into a wide grin. "Good morning." "Good morning, sweetheart. It's time to get up." She glanced toward the window. "The sun's barely up, and you don't have to work today. Let's go back to sleep." She closed her eyes and snuggled into her pillow. He kissed her again. But we have things to do." "If those things include more kisses, we can do that right here." The comment, followed by a suggestive smile, ignited his desire. How he would love to spend the day in bed kissing her, making love to her. As hard as it is to turn down that delightful offer, and I assure you it's hard. He grinned at his rude pun. "Your ribs are still healing. We should give it a little more time." She smiled up at him. "Do you have any idea how attractive it is when you become the protective doctor?" His brows drew together. "What?" "When you do little things to take care of me, when you think about my well-being before my wants or even your own. I feel cherished. I like it. I don't think I've ever felt that." "Really?" She blushed and nodded. Then her face split into a salacious grin. "Of course, when I feel cherished, I want to stay in bed with you even more." "Well, you can't." He gave her a quick kiss. "But someday we will." He kissed her again a bit more languidly. When he pulled away from her lips, the sweet smile on her face delighted him. "Now you do have to get up. I promise you'll enjoy what I have planned." When they were dressed, she started into the kitchen. "I'll make coffee." He stopped her. "Not this morning. Grab your coat." "Gabe, surely you don't mean to leave the house before I've had a cup of coffee? I love coffee." "I know you do, but we're going to have breakfast at a great diner where there will be lots of coffee. Then I have something to show you." "A diner?" "It's a kind of restaurant that serves all kinds of food, and they usually have particularly good breakfasts." "Okay." It wasn't far, so they walked to the diner. It was still early enough that the restaurant wasn't too busy. Elizabeth smiled when she saw the menu. "Do you see something you like?" "Yes, pictures." He laughed. "Pictures are good, but your reading improves every day." She beamed at his praise. "So do you see something you'd like?" "I like eggs." She pointed to another picture. "But these look like strawberries." "They are strawberries. That's a waffle." "How can there be strawberries on it? It's the middle of winter." He wasn't sure he would ever get used to the odd holes in her memory. "They're grown in warmer places and brought here." When the time came to order, she was still having trouble deciding, so he said, "Bring us the big breakfast platter." It came with 3 eggs, bacon, sausage, home fries, and biscuits. "And we'll also have a Belgian waffle with strawberries and a side of scrapple." He smiled at Elizabeth. "We'll split it, and you can try a bit of everything." "What is scrapple?" "It's a little hard to explain. It doesn't sound very appetizing, but it is really good, and I know you used to like it." "But what is it?" "It's a mixture of cooked pork scraps and organ meat that have been ground up and mixed with cornmeal and spices." She smiled. "That sounds like... well, I don't know what it's called, but I think I do like it." She did like it. She liked it all. The strawberries in particular delighted her. Note to self: buy some. Once fortified with breakfast and several cups of coffee, they headed toward the destination he had planned over a week ago, the wholesale flower markets. There were literally thousands of flowers from all over the world. It was an impressive sight, and Elizabeth stared in awe. "They're beautiful. But it's winter. Is this like the strawberries?" "Yes, exactly like the strawberries. Flowers are brought here from all around the world." As they wandered through the markets, she appeared enraptured. At one point she stopped in front of buckets of blue irises. "I've never seen anything so beautiful before." She reached a hand toward them, touching one tentatively. "What do they mean?" Gabe's brows drew together. "I'm not sure what you're asking. They don't mean anything." "You're wrong there, young man," said an older woman who appeared to be working there. "Pardon me?" "The young lady is right. Flowers speak a language of their own. They all mean something." Elizabeth turned toward her. "What are these? What do they mean?" "They're blue irises, and they represent faith and hope." "They're beautiful," she said, her eyes shining. "I think that's your cue, young man." Gabe laughed. "Yes, we'll take some. Be sure to pick stems that have some unopened buds. They'll bloom over the next few days." This seemed to thrill Elizabeth. He selected a dozen stems, all with buds in varying stages of flowering, and had them wrapped. They continued to walk through the flower district, Elizabeth simply captivated by the beauty around them. "Well, it's settled. I'll take you to the Macy's Flower Show. These flowers are just in bins, but they're transformed into artwork at the flower show." "You've seen it?" He smiled sheepishly. "I've seen pictures. I'd love to see it with you, though." The truth was, he'd probably spend more time watching her passionate responses to the show than the flowers. "I'd love to go. Is it soon?" "It's in April." Her face fell. "April? That long?" "It's only a little more than a month away." "I expect I'll have my memory back by then, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it." He had trouble imagining the Elizabeth he knew from medical school spending hours wandering through flower markets or a formal flower show. Eventually, she began to show signs of tiring, so he lured her away with the promise of a stop at the bookstore to buy some more workbooks and a fancy coffee shop for a mocha. They also stopped at a shop where he could buy an inexpensive vase for the irises. Once home, he tried to talk her into resting. "We're going out again later to meet Nick." "I'm not as fragile as you think I am, Gabe." "I don't think you're fragile, but I know you have broken ribs that still cause you pain." "Just a tiny bit. Curling up next to you and working in one of my new books while you watch the last day of the Olympics is not going to hurt anything." He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. "Now that you mention it, I can think of no better way to spend the rest of the afternoon." In spite of her assurances that she didn't need a nap, she dozed off after a few minutes, her head slipping into his lap. I could get used to this. Eventually he had to wake her. "Elizabeth, wake up, sweetheart. We need to leave soon." She stirred and yawned, resembling a drowsy kitten. "Leave?" "Yes, leave. We're meeting Nick for dinner, remember?" She became fully awake. "Oh, right, I need to get dressed." "What you're wearing is fine." She frowned. "I don't want to be wearing trousers to meet your brother." She disappeared into the bedroom, appearing again in a few minutes wearing the skirt and blouse he had bought for her. "You look beautiful." She beamed. "Thank you. This is my favorite outfit." They took a cab uptown to meet Gabe's brother at a small Italian restaurant. Nick was waiting for them outside. Gabe paid the cab driver, then gave Nick a hug. "Since when do you take cabs? There's a subway station on the corner." "Elizabeth has broken ribs. She doesn't need to be jostled in a subway car." He turned to Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, this is my brother, Dominic. Everyone calls him Nick." She took his hand, as Joe Sinclair had told her to, and said, "It's lovely to meet you." Nick leaned in and kissed her cheek. "It's nice to meet you too, Elizabeth, although technically I have met you before." Although his words were polite, she sensed a coolness in his greeting that made her uncomfortable. I suppose we have. I'm sorry, I don't remember." "That's what I hear." She looked at Gabe, who said, "Shall we go in? Our table should be ready." Once they were seated, they were given menus. Elizabeth looked at hers, but there were no pictures, and she couldn't recognize any letters. "See anything you like, Elizabeth?" asked Nick. "No, I don't suppose you do. After all, you've forgotten how to read." Elizabeth felt herself blush profusely. "Why are you being an ass, Nick?" "I'm sorry, Gabe, I just forgot." Gabe hit his brother's shoulder with the back of his hand. "Stunat, what the hell's the matter with you?" Tears prickled behind her eyes, and she blinked rapidly to keep them from spilling. She wasn't sure what was happening or how to handle it. She would have left, but there was no place to go. "Lighten up, brother, I was just joking." "It's not funny." "You don't think so? The little girl genius that walked out of your life, stomping on your heart as she left, is in a little accident and can't even remember how to read? I think it's very funny and highly unlikely, but somehow she's managed to suck you back in." Was that what his family thought of her? God damn it, Nick, stop. You don't know what you're talking about. Look me in the eye and tell me that isn't true. There was an older couple sitting at a table across from them. The woman waved her hand at Elsie. "Signorina, scusa, signorina, would you mind helping me?" She had a faint accent of some sort. "I need to use the ladies' room, but I'm a little unsteady on my feet." Then she nodded toward the man at the table and winked at Elsie. "My husband, he's not so steady either." She wasn't sure what the ladies' room was, but she'd take any escape. "I'd be happy to help you." Standing, she glanced at Nick, his angry gaze piercing hers for a moment. She looked away. "Excuse me." She left the table to help the woman. She could tell Gabe and his brother were still arguing, but she didn't look back. The ladies' room turned out to be a bathroom. When they reached it, the old woman just stood there. "Do you need help? No, bella ragazza. I don't need to use the toilet. You looked like you needed a moment, and the brothers can fight without you there to take the blows. They'll work it out in a minute." "How do you know?" "I'm a mother of boys. They love each other. Sometimes they want to kill each other, but they love each other." "Nick, why are you doing this?" Nick's gaze followed Elizabeth as she helped the old woman to the restroom. "Nick!" "I'm sorry, Gabe, I just—" "What?" "You were so torn up after she left you." "She didn't leave me. I left her." "I've never believed that, and have always been pissed off with her for hurting you so badly." "That's what this is about?" "You have to admit that total memory loss right when you walk back into her life is hard to believe." "But I do believe it, and I'm the doctor, remember? We've been through this." "I know, but I had to see it." "See what?" "The look in her eyes. You're some great expert who can tell someone is lying by looking at them?" "No, but I'm fairly sure when they're completely innocent." "So what's it going to take to convince you?" "Nothing, I just saw it. She's shattered, and I did that. I'm sorry, Gabe." "God damn it. I should go get her." Nick grinned, shaking his head. "No, let the nonnina handle it." When Elizabeth returned the old woman to her seat and came back to the table, Nick stood up. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I love my brother. I had to know for sure that you weren't playing him. She cast Gabe a puzzled look. Playing you? He was worried that you were pretending to have amnesia to gain my attention. She looked back at Nick, shaking her head. I'd never do that. But I understand. I wish I had brothers or sisters who would show such concern. With the initial upset over, things settled down, and they had a wonderful meal. Not as good as Mom's, Gabe qualified. But better than almost anywhere else, added Nick. Hey, are you coming home for my birthday? Christ, Gabe, Mom would kill me if I didn't. Nick raised the pitch of his voice, imitating their mother. It's just a little train ride, Dominic. You can take an evening away from the city to celebrate your brother's birthday. He shook his head. She's going to have kittens when she finds out Tony has to be in San Diego all week. He hasn't told her? Nah, he'll find his balls just before he gets on the plane. Gabe laughed. Well, there's no way he's getting out of Joe's birthday. Yeah, it's on a Sunday. Wait, if you're off today... He counted quickly on his fingers. That means you have to work on Joe's birthday. Actually, I will be there. I switched some shifts to get off. It means working 2 weekends in a row, but then I'll be off 2 in a row. When is Joe's birthday? Asked Elizabeth. March 19th, said Gabe. The feast of St. Joseph, added Nick. Birthdays are very important? Gabe shrugged. Not in all families, but we kind of have a family tradition that started when we were little. Nick grinned. Mom always makes the person's favorite meal, whatever it is. Yeah, once when Nick was about 6, he liked hot dogs, tater tots, and macaroni and cheese. At a puzzled expression, Gabe added, It isn't what you'd call fine dining. You can buy hot dogs from street vendors, tater tots come frozen, and the kind of mac and cheese he liked came from a box. I think it nearly killed Mom to serve that. Nick laughed. But she did because it was what I wanted. Do you still like those things? I'm not so into tater tots or boxed mac and cheese anymore, and while I love a good hot dog, I wouldn't waste my birthday dinner on it. What will your mother be making for you this year, Gabe? Chicken francese with pasta. It's a sort of fried chicken cutlet with lemon sauce. I also asked her to make broccoli. Nick looked askance. Why'd you ask for that? No one likes broccoli. I like broccoli. You do not? Well, I don't hate it, and Mom loves it. Suck up. Nick shook his head. I wish I'd thought of that. I'll remind you of it in August. Elizabeth appeared amused as she watched the back-and-forth banter. So, you celebrate a birthday with a feast? It sounds like fun. Serving our favorite dinner is only part of the tradition. Mom decorates the table with confetti, and there are always noisemakers and birthday hats. Elizabeth cast Gabe a confused look. Birthday hats? Gabe laughed. Yep, birthday hats. They're essentially cardboard cones with a rubber band strap to hold them on. Nick nodded. The rule is that you have to wear it. You cannot sit down at the table without one. You don't have to wear it on your head, mind you, said Gabe. But you do have to wear it. Oh, and the dinner has to be on your actual birthday if possible, added Nick, except for Angela's. Why? Her birthday is on Christmas Eve, he answered. We always have fish on Christmas Eve, so she gets to pick another day that week for her special meal. I remember ages ago, she must have been 4 or 5, she begged Mom to get princess crowns instead of regular hats for her birthday. It was the Christmas she turned 6. I'll never forget it, said Gabe. Yeah, that's right. She wanted to wait until you were there, so she had it the night after you came home from college. Gabe nodded. There was nearly a mutiny that year. I knew better, but you 4 idiots marched into the kitchen and announced that you would not wear princess crowns. To which Mom said, Then you won't eat dinner. Nick shrugged. If it had been hot dogs or something, we might have held firm, but Angie asked for lasagna. There was no way we were going to miss lasagna. That's when the you don't have to wear it on your head rule was born, said Gabe. I think Gabe was the only one of the boys who actually did wear it on his head. Elizabeth smiled at him. That was sweet of you. He shrugged. It's what Angie wanted, and it was a small enough thing. No, Elizabeth is right. It was sweet of you, just like asking for broccoli, said Nick. He turned to Elizabeth. Gabe's probably the nicest guy I know. She put her hand over Gabe's. I have to agree. Gabe looked into her eyes, and for a moment nothing existed but the two of them. The bond of love he felt fed his soul. He smiled. Well, I think all of the Saldanis are nice. He cast a pointed look at Nick. Most of the time. When they were back at Gabe's apartment that night getting ready for bed, Nick's initial reaction to her weighed heavily on Elsie. Finally, she asked, Is your whole family going to hate me because of the way we broke up? No, of course not. Just your brothers. No, Elizabeth, and I'm really sorry about the things Nick said. It's okay. He loves you, and I've hurt you in the past. Having someone stand up to protect you, it's a wonderful thing. I haven't had that in a while. Elsie thought of her life in the 13th century. Who did she have there? Aunt Delina, perhaps Geordie. No parents or army of brothers and sisters. He pulled her into his arms. You have it now, sweetheart. Actually, Elizabeth has it now. I know. I just wanted to be sure about your family. Forewarned is forearmed. It won't happen again. It's just that Nick, Joey, and I are really close. I think they were the only ones who fully understood how upset I was. I guess Nick never believed me when I said I ended the relationship. He always thought it was you who left me. We straightened a lot of things out tonight. I'm sorry you were hurt in the process. I wasn't hurt. Gabe arched an eyebrow at her. Okay, I was a little hurt, but once I understood that he was just looking out for you, that made it better. Gabe kissed her. Still, I'm sorry it happened. And you don't think Joe will be as irritated? Gabe snorted. Joe? You don't have to worry about Joe. He's the forgiving type. Chapter 17. When he was alone with Elizabeth, Gabe thought of her as an ordinary person, just as he had in college before graduation. But when she had returned from shopping with her mother, who had spent more on 1 or 2 articles of clothing for Elizabeth than his mother and sister would spend in a whole year, he was reminded that she wasn't ordinary. This hit home again on Sunday night, when they went to dinner at the Sinclairs' penthouse. Up until it was time to leave, it had been a quiet, ordinary day. They had gone to an early mass. She still insisted she was Catholic, but asked why the statue of Mary was holding a string of beads. How could she not know what a rosary was? After Mass, they stopped for bagels before going to a flea market in Brooklyn. It was her first ride on a subway, and just as it had been with elevators and cars, she was a little in awe once she got over her initial trepidation. She had loved the flea market, and to his surprise, when a vintage marcasite and garnet cross caught her eye, she haggled with the vendor. That evening, when they were getting ready to leave, she once again donned the gypsy skirt and peasant blouse, her favourite outfit, but added the new piece of jewellery to the mix. Curious, he asked, You don't want to wear the new clothes your mother bought for you? Elizabeth smiled. I'll wear them the next time I see her, because she loves them, but I feel prettier in this. Again, ordinary Elizabeth. A bit more girly than she had once been, but completely ordinary. Then a bodyguard wearing a dark suit, who Elizabeth greeted as Dixon, arrived and escorted them to a waiting, chauffeur-driven Lincoln. Not ordinary. The car took them to a very posh address in Soho. Not ordinary. Dixon escorted them to a private elevator that took them into the Sinclairs' penthouse. Definitely not ordinary. The Sinclairs, who were among the richest people in the world, greeted her as a dear friend. But what's more, unlike Elizabeth's parents, they greeted him, ordinary, middle-class, grandson of an immigrant, Gabe Saldani, just as warmly. Mr. Sinclair led them through carved wooden doors. Elizabeth glanced at the doors, touching the left one almost absently as they passed. They walked through a colossal living room and down a hall to a cozier room with a fireplace, dark-panelled walls, and butter-soft leather furniture. "Please sit down. Make yourselves comfortable. Dinner will be ready soon," said Mrs. Sinclair. Mr. Sinclair stood and stepped behind a wooden bar in one corner. "What can I get you to drink? I can offer nearly any kind of spirit, several nice beers and ales, a variety of wines, or something non-alcoholic if you prefer. Elizabeth, what will you have?" Gabe glanced at Elizabeth. To his surprise, she said, "I like ale." "Excellent. I believe I'll have one too. I have a Belgian Trappist ale I'm sure you'll enjoy. Now, Joe, my love?" "I think I'll have a gin and tonic." "Hayman's or Caroon?" She smiled at her husband. "Need you ask? Caroon." Mr. Sinclair chuckled. "It pays to ask. You might decide to run rogue someday. Now, Gabe?" Gin and tonic sounds good, but I'm sorry I don't know the difference between Hayman's and Caroon. I don't think I've ever heard of them." "Frankly, I don't taste much of a difference. Joe swears Caroon is the finest gin made, but between you and me, I think that's because it's made in Scotland." Joe gave a huff of mock disdain. Gabe's brows drew together. "Scottish gin? I didn't know there was such a thing." Mr. Sinclair laughed. "Trust me, son, if it can be brewed or distilled, someone in Scotland can make it." Gabe nodded. "All right, I'll try the Caroon." Aldous winked. "Good choice." While he prepared and served the drinks, a middle-aged woman entered the room with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Mrs. Sinclair asked about their weekend, and Elizabeth launched into an animated description of the trip to the flower market. With that, the surreal nature of the evening evaporated. They were just having drinks and dinner with old friends. Ordinary. After a great meal and a lovely evening, Gabe could almost convince himself that the ride home in the Lincoln was really just like a cab, until Dixon insisted on escorting them to the door. "It isn't necessary," he assured the bodyguard. "We can usually manage to make it safely to our apartment." "I understand, sir. However, you are not usually seen leaving the Sinclairs' building with Mr. Sinclair's driver and bodyguard. That alone could make you and Dr. Quinn a target." "I hadn't thought of that." "It's perfectly understandable, sir, and it's why Mr. Sinclair employs me, to minimize the danger in even the most innocuous situation." Not quite as ordinary. Once they were safely in his apartment again, Elizabeth put her arms round him. "I had a delightful evening." "So did I. The Sinclairs are very nice, but after meeting David I really shouldn't have been surprised. Frankly, he was unbelievably kind and helpful when you had your accident, and you had just broken up with him." "Actually, the story I heard was that he broke up with me, but it really doesn't matter. I couldn't have loved him. I love you." She snaked her right hand behind his neck, pulling his head down for a kiss. Elsie wasn't sure when it happened, but at some point in the last 2 weeks of wonderful hours spent doing wonderful things together, and even more wonderful hours doing absolutely nothing together, she wanted more. She didn't want to just lay with her head in his lap on the couch or snuggle next to him in bed. She loved the closeness that had developed between them. It meant everything to her, and yet it was not enough. She wanted him to make love to her. She had been in this time long enough to know that things were different. It might have been another matter if Elizabeth had never been with a man before, but she had. She had been with Gabe, and Elsie wanted that. She had argued with herself for days, maintaining that she shouldn't, that Gabe would be making love to Elizabeth and not to her. Finally, she stopped the internal argument. If it was wrong, it was wrong. As she walked past the carved doors into her parents' home and saw the knot in the tree that represented the pocket watch, it sent a jolt of realization through her. Days were ticking by. Gertrude could come at any time, and Elsie would have to leave. She would be leaving behind so much more than Elizabeth's body. She cherished every moment she'd had with her parents, and she would hold the memories of them in her heart. Being loved by Gabe was one more memory that she wanted, and she wanted it with every fibre of her being. She pulled his lips down to meet hers. She would have liked for it to be smooth and romantic, like she had seen on television, but that was hard with a cast on one arm. Still, she poured every ounce of desire in her into that kiss. When their lips parted, he whispered, "Elizabeth." "I want you, Gabe." "But, sweetheart, your ribs are so much better, and you are so loving and caring. I know you won't hurt me. Please, Gabe." He groaned, kissed her again, and then lifted her into his arms to carry her to the bedroom. He lowered her onto the bed and captured her mouth in a kiss. She kissed him back, pulling at his shirt with her good hand, and making absolutely no progress. He chuckled. "Maybe I'd better take care of this." He pulled off his shirt, dropping it to the floor and kicking his shoes in the general direction of the closet. He turned his attention to her. He untied the drawstring at the waist, then caught the waistbands of both her skirt and panties, easing both garments down. She raised her hips a little to help. He pulled off her shoes, grinning as he threw them over his shoulders. He slid his hands from her calves all the way up her legs to her hips, causing her to shiver with pleasure. His hands continued their upward journey underneath her blouse. He gently raised her up. "Raise your arms for me." She did as he asked, and he pulled the blouse off, tugging it gently over her cast. Once free of the garment, he captured her head in his hands and kissed her more deeply and passionately than he ever had. She was lost. He trailed kisses along her cheek to her ear, then down her neck. He reached around her to unhook her bra, baring her breasts to his gaze. He rubbed his thumbs over the peaks, which pebbled under his touch. Taking first one and then the other into his mouth, he sucked gently, igniting a fire in her core that took her breath away. His hands drifted lightly over her ribs. He raised his head, his gaze following his hands. "Stop being a doctor. I'm fine." "I can't stop being a doctor." He kissed her again. "But you like that. Besides, I can't bear the thought of hurting you." "You won't." "You'll stop me if I do?" "You won't hurt me, Gabe." "Elizabeth, I need your promise." She smiled and rolled her eyes. "Fine. I promise that if you hurt me, I'll tell you." Gabe kissed her again and laid her back down on the bed. She was completely exposed to him. "You are beautiful." She blushed. She'd never thought of herself as beautiful, although she thought Elizabeth was very attractive. Still, the adoration in his eyes made her feel like a goddess. Gabe stripped off his jeans and briefs and pulled something small and flat from his nightstand before climbing onto the bed beside her. Capturing her lips again, he kissed her passionately before planting kisses down her neck and breasts to her tummy. She delighted in every gentle caress of his lips. He continued, past her navel, toward her most private parts. Her hands came up to stop him. "You don't mean to kiss me there, do you?" He chuckled. "Of course I do. Elizabeth, you like this." "Well, that's absolutely true." She did like it. And when he flicked his tongue against her sensitive knob, she lost all rational thought. The sensation was divine. The moan of pure pleasure she heard could not have escaped from her lips, but it had. He licked and sucked, driving her ever higher, toward what she knew not, but she had to get there or surely perish. Just when she was certain it was within reach, he stopped. "No, Gabe, please." He gave her a wicked smile. "Not yet." He started again, and she gave herself over to the bliss of pure sensation. His hands slid under her bottom, lifting her toward his mouth. Her desire built to a fever pitch. Just a little bit more was all she needed. He stopped again. Please, Gabe, I can't stand it. I need... My beautiful girl, I need too. He took the flat packet, tore it open, and covered his hard length with it. She was too caught up in the moment to care what it was. He touched her again on the spot that drove her insane, until she was writhing with the pleasure of it. Then he knelt between her legs, lifted her hips slightly, and joined with her in one firm stroke. She rose to meet him, lost in the primal act. He drove into her again and again, until she was overcome with shuddering waves of ecstasy. The muscles at her core contracted repeatedly around him, and he too found his release. He held his weight off her as he caught his breath, clearly concerned with hurting her. Gabe gently withdrew from her, and lay beside her on the bed, still panting. Elizabeth, God, I've never felt like that. I never have either. He smiled at her. You wouldn't remember if you had. No, I'm fairly certain I'd have remembered that. It was as if our souls were entwined. Our souls? Dear God, what have I done? But how could it be wrong? She had never experienced anything so perfect. Gabe held Elizabeth in his arms as she drifted to sleep. Making love to her had been pure bliss. Absolutely extraordinary.